You got the distribution call, you got the placement, you did everything right. And somewhere between the purchase order and the shelf, something went sideways. Your product isn't there, or it's there, but it's wrong. Or nobody can tell you either way. Every CPG brand hits this wall. Most of them hit it more than once. I'm Jordan Karcher, founder and CEO of Eileen. Know Thy Shelf is the show for founders and CPG superstars who are done taking anyone's word for what's happening at the shelf and who are building something worth fighting for. Real stories, real data, one question underneath it all. Your product is listed as in stock. Is it though? Let's get into it. Our guest today is Tate Troelstrup, CEO of Whiskey JYPSI, a premium spirits brand out of Nashville, co-founded by Eric Church and Raj Alva, now in 12 states and scaling fast. What I really want to get into today is what it looks like to build a brand this good and still run into the gap between where the data says your product is and where it actually is. Tate, you built your career inside some serious spirit houses, Heaven Hill, WhistlePig, and most recently, president and CEO of Purity Distillery. How did you end up in the beverage world to begin with, and what keeps pulling you back in?
The end up is always kind of a great way. I think that the industry to a great degree kind of chooses you. All right. So sometimes it feels like The Godfather, right? When you try to get back out, it pulls you back in. But it's such a relationship oriented business that's built on we're creating products, we're kind of sort of creating opportunities in the space, but ultimately it's so relationship oriented in a way that so many other industries claim to be but aren't quite there. So for me, I fell into it from the bar side. So working in restaurants, bars, I was not a very good bartender, and so naturally got an offer to represent a couple of pretty cool brands in the early 2000s, and just sort of got the I suppose bitten by the bug, and kind of had a really good succession of brands in a row I got to be there at the right place at the right time, and kind of infuse a little what I had to offer, but also really kind of lean into the specific challenges of each of those brands. So
Yeah. I mean, you've got kind of an all-star lineup of the brands of the 2000s, particularly in the whiskey side. And I think something interesting for listeners is obviously what were you doing before the beverage world? I know you're a bartender, but I think you had a pretty interesting career that was unrelated to this.
yeah, I sort of when we come around to talking about our whiskey maker, we sort of had a lot of the same adventures over time, different adventures, but sort of the same aimlessness of, I don't really know what the hell I want to do. Enjoy the creative side as a musician for a long time, really enjoyed the sort of experience of traveling and kind of being around, and all these things really started to come together once I came into the spirits world, where I kind of got the opportunity to travel around, meet a lot of interesting people, really bring a lot of creativity to bear, and also sort of experiment, right? So you can do that a lot within beverage, for better or worse. But a lot of it is the environments I went for were more important than the brands necessarily. So I wasn't drawn specifically. Well, that's a lie. In some cases, I was drawn to brands, but also the intersection of like, who are the people? What's the environment going to be like that we can operate in that's really flexible? And you'll notice kind of my brands over time have all been very independent and pretty early stage too, which gives me a lot of latitude to kind of screw up. Because that's also something I'm really good at. But kind of making sure that those screw ups are part of the learning journey is a lot of fun. But yeah, a lot of it was really just kind of like our whiskey maker says, is sort of I'm so glad that my sort of travails as a youth have turned into great stories as a leader in a company at this point in time, to say, hey, I used to be cool. I used to do really interesting things, but they weren't particularly productive.
Hey,
And they were definitely not part of a formal plan. So that's really important to know.
that's it. Fate, man. Fate gets you there one way or the other. This was the destiny. It was to play in the band for a while and then run whiskey brands as they scale across the country.
I think so. Everyone always says that. I was talking to Eric one day and was asked about my guitar playing. And I was like, well, it's not good enough that I am still a guitar player. So
That's maybe a good lead. And tell me about Whiskey JYPSI for someone who's never had the product or has tried it. What is it? Who's it for? And most importantly, I think in this world, how does it stand out in a category where you walk in and it's overwhelming how many different brands there are on the shelf in whiskey or in bourbon in particular?
a bunch of really good questions. So I'll unpack them probably one at a time. I think what is the brand is really a take from Eric and Raj as people, which to me was really interesting when I first talked to them about it. And the idea was that they wanted to approach whiskey really in the same way that Eric's kind of approached his music career, which is pretty, he understands what's going to work to a great degree, but doesn't want to be bound by that by any means, and wants to kind of take adventures off into other things stylistically. Totally applies in the world here as well, to be able to say, well, we want to do some whiskey and we want to do something that's really delicious, but we also don't want to be constrained by either what's always been done or any sort of self-imposed rules within the industry. That was really attractive to me because it had kind of a punk rock feel to it, which has happened in a few other brands I've been with. And so kind of who the brand is for, we run a pretty wide gambit. And when the guys launched the brand before I got here, the very first release was our Legacy series, which is a $200 release. The very first iteration, Legacy 001, was something that had never been done before. So it was a bringing together, a blending of 3 different already completed whiskeys. And the framework they put that in was this concept of our whiskey maker, Ari Sussman, which was a deconstructed mash bill. So it was this idea that let's take 3 unrelated whiskeys, let's bring them together almost like you would as a bartender. And they're going to be high aged, oftentimes considered finished products. And if we put them in the construct of this deconstructed mash bill, wouldn't that be interesting? And I remember at the time seeing that when it came out, and I was representing a great vodka brand. And I thought, man, what a cool iteration, and what a really, really kind of bold first stroke to come out and say, hey, Eric's a celebrity and Raj is a well-known founder himself. The almost natural inclination, the gravitational pull probably would have been, hey, release something that's really accessible from a price point standpoint and push it out there as widely as possible and try to get it into every shelf. And they went the complete opposite direction. They said, no, we're going to release something that's almost hard to understand, but represents what we want to do with whiskey, which is use better ingredients, be painfully transparent about the process, and kind of prove ourselves and our authenticity first, rather than chasing that fast buck. And that really became the development of the brand as additional SKUs were launched, and then where I came in as we launched the Tribute, which is our kind of probably most widely accessible price point. And that all really comes from Ari. So Eric and Raj sort of went around and spoke to a lot of different whiskey makers, and obviously as really well connected, but also just fun guys to hang out with. They had a lot of people to talk to, and ultimately I think Ari was that person who understood what they were trying to do and felt very similarly that passion for lack of constraint, right? The ability to just operate in this environment, which is good and bad. I mean, it's obviously good because you get delicious whiskey, but it's also bad because you get, 4 a.m. texts like I got from Ari last night with some wild idea that was actually awesome. The first thing this morning, I said, there's another Ari idea, but I got to put it on the whiteboard and chase them down because they're great. It's a lot of fun stuff. So
maybe
and
that's
who it's for. Yeah. I think who it's for, it's meant to be really for anybody. The idea is really that there's so many people who are drinking a lot of whiskey and haven't quite taken the time to figure out what's in it. And so what we wanted to create was something that was easily accessible and easy to understand. So even Tribute at, something that's a $45 product on the shelf. So, well, shouldn't that be packed with value? So couldn't we use an outstanding grain, an outstanding finishing process, and then describe it without talking down to somebody, right? So that's sort of the idea, is that we want to have an entry point for everyone to bring them kind of into the world of whiskey, and then also point out, hey, here's these elements that we use that are easy to understand, and add something from a flavor standpoint or storytelling standpoint along the way.
Yeah. And so you kind of touched on this, but you came in as a CEO after the brand was created. Obviously, we're already in the industry and familiar with Whiskey JYPSI. What did it look like from the outside before you said yes, you would join? And then once you got into the company behind the scenes, what did you find?
From the outside, it looked like a ton of potential. So you kind of see the through line, the branding, the liquid is already there. And then from the inside, and from my early conversations on, had a lot of transparency, which again was for me really exciting coming in with Eric and Raj, because it was this, hey, take a look under the hood, right? See what you'll be working with here. And it was a lot of the stuff that I really like, which is the infrastructure, the process orientation. It's kind of taking the thing from the brand side was developed, the company side was not, right? So the business itself. And so that was, and really we're still, I say it's still very much in process. It's, how are we going to measure success, right? What does success look like for the brand? And then how do we operate, right? How are we moving boxes from point A to point B? And how are we housing all these creative ideas and making sure that they are part of a overall vision, right? And not distractions, and sort of developing the what's possible in the context of everything else going on in the industry right now, because there's a lot of hand-wringing, a lot of challenging headlines out there. But there's also still people who are very interested in drinking delicious things. So ultimately, as long as that's there, then we have a customer to kind of go after. But very much the infrastructure of making sure that we're able to fulfill that growth over time is really key. And like you pointed out, when I came in, we were in, I think 7 states at the time, and now we're in 19.
19. Okay.
And our original plan was not to add any more states. So every single one of those has been really interesting partners reaching out to us, and then partners who are really on the same page as we were about, let's get the brand out there and let's really be thoughtful about where we put the brand, how we kind of gather feedback and set out with a reasonable idea for success, but also be ready for the different things that come your way. And that's a process that's ongoing to this day. So we're still very much in that learning phase. But yeah, from the outside, ton of potential and a really interesting place for the brand to already be in for me to walk into.
Absolutely. And so that kind of touches on the next question I had, which is about momentum. So you have a lot of momentum. Obviously, Eric is very well known, has a global audience, but certainly a domestic audience in every state. With that type of momentum and ability to rapidly scale, everybody would assume that, hey, Whiskey JYPSI is growing quickly. It's opened up 19 states. It's probably going to be in 25 pretty soon. Who knows how long it takes to get to all 50. But when you're running the company, what does that type of momentum really do? And how do you kind of contextualize opening a new state and managing a new state as you scale quickly?
Well, what it looks like mostly is honestly chaos. There are a lot of sort of pretty educated bets that you're making in opening a new market. You're kind of betting that the partner is what they say they are, and then sort of betting on the consumer within that market. So it's definitely not for the faint of heart to kind of launch into some of these states and get a sense of what's going to go when we're going in and saying to our partners, retail partners and distributor partners, we want to find a handful of the best possible partners as we go and gather as much information from them as we go. And we're not coming in with, big giant depletion numbers and sort of, hey, go get us 4,000 accounts. It's, hey, could we have 20 stores and 20 bars that really get what we're doing that we can work with and kind of build on? And that keeps working. And it's sort of interesting having the ownership with Eric and Raj. And Eric and Raj are also the only investors to this point as well. So this is very much a personal project for them. It certainly opens a lot of doors from a relationship standpoint and really gives us rich feedback, right? Because there's everybody who sees the long-term interest and knows that these two guys aren't really exit folks. So it's not a brand that's sort of built to scale and flip really quickly. It's really kind of a generational enterprise. So that really changes, I think, the tone with a lot of people because we're really in there trying to figure out what are the things we can do within each state. Where a lot of brands in the past have kind of walked in with, hey, here's how we activate, right? Here's how we behave. And it kind of gets stamped across each market. What we're doing is really trying to find the right partner within the market. And so that's oftentimes kind of smaller or mid-sized distributor partners. And then how are we going to engage in this specific market? So that's hard for a small team to do. But my feeling is that that's kind of the muscle we need to build because I think that's how brands have to engage. And so what I'm doing in South Carolina is not what I'm doing in Minnesota. And that's okay. I think we can walk and chew gum and then decide as we go down the line, well, certainly there's going to be common elements of what we do, but we have to sort of learn each consumer and each market on its own and then decide over time how to engage. And then I think you mentioned before, really the feet on the street, is the distributor able to talk about the brand in a way and sell it in a way that's almost like wine. And so that's how we wind up with a lot of wine distributors because our liquid story is so important. People love the fact that, Eric owns the brand, but it very rarely gets us an initial sale or a reorder. It really becomes, they're like, okay, that's great. Eric owns the brand, and that gets you in the room. And then it's, why should I put it on the shelf? Because every shelf right now is so stacked with a lot of pretty good whiskeys. So then we get to tell the liquid story, tell the grain story, and all of a sudden it's got, now I understand where this should be, why it should be here, and why it's worthy of my vote in the form of $1.
Absolutely. And so a lot of that comes to execution at the retail level, which is certainly why we're here and chatting today. And for people who aren't familiar with the beverage alcohol world, the 3-tier system is pretty complex to navigate. And it does create some unique problems with distance from the shelf, distance from your product, and being able to manage your distribution coast to coast. I know you work with brokers, you have distributors, everybody has different forms of retail portals. When you start really diving into the data or looking for visibility, what are you finding as a CEO of a fast growing company in this sector?
Well, The first thing you find is that access to data is incredibly difficult. There's so many compliance kind of stop points along the way, and then gathering sort of disparate data points from separate markets, even separate retailers, is really difficult. And you have to sort of separate the signal from the noise. Most important for us, obviously, is really just reorders, right? It's that initial distribution isn't the end goal. It's really the beginning point. So we have a really strong, large national chain partner in a tier one market right now. And there was that sort of initial champagne popping of, hey, this is great. We've just gone into 100 stores are on the shelf. And then the real work begins, because it's how do we make sure that we're positioned right, we're priced right, have we educated the store staff the right way, have we provided them all the resources and tools. So for us, when we're going in and thinking about it, we're really thinking about how are we going to earn that second and third reorder. And partially that's how do we show up on the shelf. A lot of it's how do we kind of establish for the people, anyone walking into the store and anybody working at the store, why should we be there? Or for a bartender in particular, right? What are the ways that we're conveying our message in a way that's beyond just sticking the bottle on the shelf with a price tag below it? And I think that's for us the code we're always trying to crack. So as we gain distribution in different markets, how do we earn that trust so that we can get that recommendation from that person working in the retail store, from the whiskey consumer walking in, or the bartender who's making decisions on what goes into their cocktails at the end of the day.
And in the retail space in particular, you mentioned reorders are hugely important and obviously a good metric for success. How do you guys tackle situations like phantom inventory or lapsed reorders, even though the product's selling, and then you're getting those messages and text messages we've all received of, hey, I went to the store, I don't see it. Where is it? How do you tackle that? Is that something that is a priority for you as a brand, or does it tend to be, kind of cost of doing business?
It's absolutely a priority. It's I think for any small brand in our position, given the competition and the overall set, you can't be sold where you're not for sale, right? So empty shelves are the worst sin. And where we met through Eileen, I think this idea of being able to go out there and very quickly gather insight on where we are on the store helps answer that question. Because we can sit and develop with our data, we can kind of tell, all right, well, if a store hasn't ordered for a certain amount of time, something's gone wrong, right? And either the product hasn't gone fast enough off the shelf, or the product has sold through and the sales rep at the store hasn't been able to execute a reorder from the distributor for a variety of reasons. It's a big challenge, of course, of working with kind of smaller independent wholesalers, is oftentimes they just don't have the bandwidth to notice, right? So for us, it's a problem that we're constantly trying to solve on a market by market basis. And data alone's not going to tell us that. We're not going to go tell it from internal reporting. So we have to be present. And so that's, again, trust relationship with the distributor, really engaging directly with retailers too, and building relationships, which is, I think, relatively novel in the space. But for us, I mean, we've got a number of kind of smaller and mid-sized states even, and we have direct conversation with retail partners as well, just to try and make sure that we can put tools in their hands and also build that trust to say, hey, there's real people building this thing. They're, strong ownership. We're here for the long term. And also we want to know, does our shelf talker have the right language on it? All these components that keep reminding them that we're there. But it's probably the thing that keeps me up at night the most, is this kind of phantom inventory concept of, okay, I can kind of tell what was in the warehouse. I can kind of tell what went out, but geez, the idea of a potentially empty shelf, or worse yet, a dusty bottle, both kind of keep me up a lot at night.
Yeah, I mean, with a product like Whiskey JYPSI as well, you have a unique challenge in that a lot of your premium products will be locked up, and then you'll have split placements in store. We see a lot on our side where that becomes difficult for a retailer or distributor to manage, because they might be checking one or the other. What are some of the, I guess, priorities for you as a brand as you enter a new retail partnership in terms of velocity, execution? What are you looking for in a really good retail partnership versus a partnership you would say is just not hitting the mark?
Well, really, it's full integration into the retailer's ecosystem. So being on the shelf, of course, is the first part. Can we have shelf talkers? Can we have signage? Can we have multiple places within the store that we can live, potentially with displays? If there's premium bottle sections, right, and our legacy series generally winds up in these areas, can we kind of build custom signage to go along with them? And then it's, I think so many retailers are so good at knowing their customer and providing opportunities to build a community sense with their customer. How can we be a part of that? So if it's Ari, coming in and doing a whiskey education event, education and community are the two biggest things that we focus on. So, and that beyond just being present at some of the many great whiskey fests around the country, it's really, what does this retailer do? Is there a whiskey club? And are there ways that we can show up within that whiskey club? And a lot of times it does become suggestions for how to build cocktails. It's sort of engagement, feedback from people when they buy the brand. What are they doing? And then it's kind of sitting down oftentimes in a room with 20, 30, 50 people and talking about the whiskey, what makes it special, kind of helping educate on what makes us different, and also just why, whiskey in general kind of has a place for so many people.
Makes
So
sense.
we roll up our sleeves, and we probably burn a lot more calories than a lot of brands out there with that piece in particular. But it is kind of, if there's, going with a new chain, but that's always my first question is like, hey, what do you do to make your customers feel special? And how
Yeah.
can we be a part of that?
So would you say you're pretty selective about the chains you work with, or are you taking more, high volume distribution once you enter a new market?
I don't know that we're selective necessarily. We're thoughtful about targeting, right? So we're not kind of going out and making a blind list of, hey, let's just go after the biggest, best retailers. We're kind of sitting down and talking to our distributor partners and saying, here's where we're seeing success. This is the profile of account. But what do you think? Like it's your market, and those partners are always going to be the experts. And so generally when we're having a conversation, part of that is, hey, let's think about the first 20, 30 people that we're going to go in and talk to. And then we go in, and myself and Ari and the team and have these conversations. But we also try to remove for preconceived notions, because it's really easy to kind of say, okay, well, this is a great whiskey account, but they might be a great whiskey account that's, already saturated at a certain price point, or, maybe doesn't have the staff for education. There's all these different components that kind of come into play. So we also try to leave space to say, well, what are some fascinating things you'd never think of? And some of our best selling on-premise accounts in particular have been non-traditional whiskey accounts, but great places for cocktails. I believe our number one on-premise account in the country right now is actually a Mexican restaurant
Huh,
in Florida.
no way.
So these kind of things where if I were sitting down making my plan for what that market would look like, I doubt I would say, hey, a huge high volume tequila account, but they've got a fan base that's very focused on delicious cocktails. They've got a really well-educated staff. Perfect. Okay. So I think to a great degree, it's not that we're selective necessarily. It's just that we're thoughtful about the quantity of accounts that we can really service appropriately at this stage, or this kind of stage in the life cycle of the brand.
Absolutely. And I mean, as you know, I know anybody that's close to this sector knows there's been a lot of, let's call it, turmoil and change in the distributor tier in the wine and spirits world. What are you seeing from your side? It sounds like you've avoided a lot of it by working with the mid-sized distributors to begin. But what are you seeing? Is there a big opportunity now for a brand like Gypsy to capture more share? Is it something where you think it's a little bit more noise than actual impact? What's your opinion on what?
Yeah, no, it's a sea change right now. Right? There's sort of the idea that one of the largest distributors in the country that is just gone, right? Just kind of evaporated functionally. It is mind-boggling and super destabilizing. I look at it as an opportunity. I look at the whole kind of landscape right now as an opportunity, not an opportunity that's easy by any means. Quite the opposite. It's a huge lift, but anyone that can kind of punch through, really have high quality, differentiated liquid, and that's transparent. This space, I think, has a really great chance. And then where I think there's a huge opportunity is these kind of smaller and mid-sized distributors who are focused on personal attention, hand selling, relationship driven. It is very, very high impact, at least as far as what we're seeing, and has validated our choice to go down that pathway versus partner with a major where you're just not going to get that level of attention, right? We don't have the giant marketing budget. And I don't think that we would even probably spend it appropriately, because it's really still just about that learning phase and that relationship piece. So I would say brands in our space and what we're seeing from a price point standpoint and also a high quality liquid standpoint are really well positioned to punch through. But it's going to be an uphill climb for a couple of years here, just because of the shifts in the financial underpinning of barrel buying and the kind of overall saturation and the geopolitical environment.
Yeah,
So
a lot of you have a lot to navigate. That's for sure. And to
yeah,
me,
very much so.
I was going to say, if So kind of, let's say I was coming to you and I'm a aspiring founder in the whiskey space. I came to you and I said, Tate, hey, I'm about to start, let's say not a whiskey, but any spirit. So I have a gin idea. I want to launch this gin. What would you kind of tell me would be the most important first few things to focus on? Trying to build a brand from scratch in this current environment.
Probably getting out and getting into the market. The founders that I enjoy working with right now are two guys who like to get out in the market and go visit stores and actively sell and build relationships. But the founders I talk to a lot across the entire sort of food and beverage strata. The biggest piece of advice is just go out and work the market, get to know the market, and certainly your own kind of home market. But if you have aspirations to move out of a sort of state or a region or kind of a super region, you need to get out there and think not from the lens of your product, because obviously whenever you've got your sort of baby, it's going to be faultless to a T for you. But go out and kind of get to know the market, the customer, the retail, and figure out how you can add value. Because ultimately, when we're walking in to introduce a new brand to a retailer, we're trying to find that long-term relationship. And so it's should be less transactional and more about, well, here's how I can really add value to your overall ecosystem, how you kind of service your end consumer and be a part of that consumer conversation. So it's really kind of taking the blinders off and just being in the market and then planning to be in the market often, often, often. You know, it's founders that I talk to and kind of brand owners who are detached from the market
Yeah.
that tend to have the most challenges and sort of the questions that can most easily be addressed by, well, go get on the train, spend some time, like, you know, talk to the person who's working the shelf at the big box retailer and talk to your local mom and pop shop and make sure that your questions leave space for you to be wrong. Cause that's the other piece is, you can have the best idea in the world, but if it's the wrong time, place, price point, be ready to pivot.
For sure. And I think all this has been really, really invaluable information. One last question before we wrap up. What's one thing you wish you knew about retail before you had your first distributor meeting? So going back in time, everything you've now know, before you sit down with the distributor head to present a brand, to get ready to launch, what's something you wish you had known or could have forecasted before you ever had that first meeting?
Yeah, that's a great question. Probably if I was going back to kind of my my very early retail days, I think I didn't know this, but I learned it very quickly. Was that just walking in and getting to know a retailer and a store before you even ever pitch them is the most important thing possible. Going in with your head only focused on what you can get done for yourself and for your brand in that moment is generally destined to fail. The thing that I just did very early on, I had a great mentor, was to really go in and figure out, like, how can I fit within the context of this retailer, this on-premise, right? And kind of establish that I've got value to add versus, hey, how can I get this on your shelf and priced right the fastest? So yeah, that's the one thing that I think now is foundational to me. But now when I go back, is I screwed it up a couple of times until I had a great mentor who grabbed me and said, hey, this isn't ultimately about you. Like, yes, you need to get the brand sold in, but it's not going to work if you're just focused on the transaction. Take the time, do the research, and get to know the person, the group that you're trying to do some business with, and that's going to get you a lot farther than just that narrow focus on winning the brand in that moment.
Absolutely. I think one thing a lot of founders or brand side suppliers forget is you're supposed to make the retailer money, and that is their priority, right? I can sell my story, but what I want to sell you is how many dollars per square foot can I generate by putting this on your shelf in place of
Yeah,
something. And so I think that's a great perspective to have. And something that Eileen, we really focus on is investing in your own success and not leaving it up to the intermediaries to dictate how well you can perform. You care more about your brand than anybody. And I think that's always the most important thing to remind your team as well as anybody involved, is that the distributor has thousands of brands. The retailer has tens of thousands. You're the only one that cares about your brand as much as you care about it. And we want to make sure you can always invest in that success once you earn that distribution and you earn that placement.
absolutely. Well, there's also I think the Eileen proposition is so great because ultimately when you're talking to a retailer, their mindset is generally going to be dollars per point of distribution, right? So every space on the shelf has to have some value because they need to survive, and margins are just not great, especially as you kind of go up the scale in retail. So if you can kind of go in with the tools and the plan to prove that value or already have a steady pull, developed, and proven, that's fantastic. And then if you have that extra layer of going in and kind of saying, hey, I've got a tool like Eileen to be able to, at no cost to you, Mr. or Miss Retailer, evaluate the shelf and make sure that we're protecting those dollars per point of distribution so that even if my rep or my distributor rep miss an opportunity on the shelf, well, we've got this other layer that we've invested in to be able to make sure that when you give me the chance on the shelf and I invest all the money to drive that pull, that we can be there so that we can be sold because we can be for sale because we're actually there and available.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with someone like Eric as well, you're coming to town, big show, you know there's going to be local demand. Ensuring those stores are stocked and ready when there's a point of purchase opportunity is hugely important. And being able to predict that and see it in real time is something we always think is core to success for brands, is not letting the customer trade off for another product and not letting them change their mind because your varietal is out of stock. So if you can always avoid those out of stocks, those lapses, I think that's how great brands are built. And it seems like that's certainly what you're doing at Whiskey JYPSI, and you've done it many times throughout your career. So, I mean, I really appreciate you being on today. Had a great time chatting with you. Really love all of your insights on the category, what's happening, and how to build and succeed in a competitive space, but doing it with product first. So thank you again for joining. And everybody else, if anything we talked about today sounds familiar, if you have flat velocity, missing sales, a broker is telling you everything looks fine, but you have shelves you haven't seen in a month, don't worry. Reach out, send us a note at Shop with Eileen. Pick a store, any store, $10. We'll get out the door and check it for you and get you data back quick so you can get your eyes on the shelf and understand what's happening in real time. So we'll see you next time for a different episode. Same questions, different shelf. Thank you again, Tate, and everybody know thy shelf.